Hello, everyone. No, you don't have to adjust your sets. I am wearing a mask, and it is NTSC. It stands for Never the Same Cough. We'll get started in a few minutes. We'll let the stragglers come in. Feel free to share on social media because today we're going to be answering your questions, both creative and editorial, about working in post-production in the cloud. So let's give it another 30 seconds or so. If you Google glitch art and mask, you'll find this. Rob Sheridan, a noted designer, did these. I think they're 20, 25 bucks if you can find them. I think these are meant for 4.3, but my face is 16.9, so it gets stretched a little bit. So we'll get started in just a minute. We have a lot of people on the call today. We've got Brian Bedell, who's our VP. Or, I'm sorry, you're a VP now, aren't you? No, Brian Bedell, who's in our customer success team. We've got Nate McFadden from Adobe. So any Adobe questions we can answer. And we also have our VP of engineering, who we affectionately call the Wolf, Simran Butalia, will be on the line too. So we'll get started in just a few seconds. All right, let's get started. And I'm taking this off because I can't breathe, I can't talk, I can't do anything. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Michael Kammes. I'm Director of Business Development here at BeBop. And I'm sure you all have webinar fatigue at this point. There's webinars that are pushing sales and webinars that are pushing this and that. But what we want to do today is to do a webinar based on what you want to hear about. And with the amount of people who have had to move to working in the cloud over the past couple months, we find that there's a lot of misconceptions. There's a lot of things that just don't make a lot of sense. And today, the brain trust here at BeBop, including myself and Brian Bedell, pardon me, from who's in our customer success team, and then Simran Butalia, who's our VP of engineering. We want to address your questions, whether they involve the creation part of it. How do I create in the cloud? Whether it's technical, how do I, from a technical perspective, build machines to work in the cloud, or what services are there, to simply demystifying preconceived notions. That's what we're going to do today. And our friends at Adobe have also allowed Nate McFadden to join us and answer any questions you may have about Adobe. So today you can type questions into the Q&A portion on the Zoom webinar that we're on right now, or you can type into Facebook and put in your questions there, and we'll cycle through those. So we're going to keep this a little bit light, a little bit nimbly bimbly as we jump from question to question to ensure that we're getting the information that you need. So let's bring up our questions. And as people are typing that in, Brian, let's start with you. You've been on our customer success team for a while. I'd love for you to tell people who you are and what the most common questions you get about creating in the cloud.
Yeah, it's a great question that we start off with. My name is Brian Bedell. I'm part of the customer success team here at BeBop Technology. And before I joined the team here, I was on basically your guys' side of the camera. I was an editor and creative, working in a lot of networks, and I kind of specialized in remote workflows. So I was used to receiving hard drives and using couriers and shipping things back and forth. And so when taking that approach into working on BeBop, there's often the question of, just generally, what's it like? How do I get my footage? And we have a solution here at BeBop called Rocket Transfer that's similar to like Aspera or Signiant, and that's how you'll get all of your media into the cloud. And that's one of the first big differences between where this kind of question comes from of what is it like working in the cloud? Because a lot of times people are used to doing remote editing where you're at home and then you're using a VPN or some type of remote desktop or something like that to log into your workstation at your facility. And with that, I mean, there's a few reasons why that's impractical or not, like what the future is going to look like. But mostly it comes down to rent. You're then paying rent at 2 locations when you don't need to do that. You're also then locked into whatever hardware you have. And so with the BeBop environment, your platform, you're remoting into a data center, and your media is also in that data center. So that's really the difference between cloud editing and remote editing. And with cloud-based editing, it's a much smoother process. Now with that though, the optimization of what it feels like, we're able to create on our platform very little to no latency or lag. And that's the huge difference that drew me to this company and made me so excited about this technology. is that it's real time. As you start working in the environment, you just completely forget that you don't have a computer sitting at your desk. And that was one of the really big things. So I get a lot of questions about how do I create that experience, because I've worked in remote desktop or team viewer and things like that, and it's just not practical. And so when it comes to that, it's all about giving ourselves as remote workers that same consideration that the studio or the post house or the creative agency gives us. So normally we go in there and we have an edit bay or an edit suite that is both architecturally and aesthetically designed to give us a premier, ideal, creative workspace. It removes all those distractions from the office space and from everything else that's happening. So when we're doing this type of cloud-based collaboration, we want to give ourselves that same consideration. And that's difficult for a lot of people, having never really worked remotely or working from home. And now that we're all forced into that, it really comes down to prioritizing your network. Your internet connection is the lifeline to your paycheck. And so we want to try to turn off things like Spotify or Netflix, or maybe close some of those 17 to 34,000 tabs that we have open in Google Chrome. We just want to make sure that anything that's contacting the internet, we squash that down. And so we can prioritize our connection into that virtual machine. And what I've found over time is removing those distractions. It really forces me into a mindset where I'm prioritizing my creative work. And so I actually am more efficient working at home often than I am working on site somewhere. But that would be the kind of the biggest question that I get is, what's it feel like? And that really comes down to how much priority you put towards connecting to your workstation. After that, the technology involved kind of takes it from there and runs away.
If I can add something to that, have you ever seen those YouTube videos where it's a parent gives a baby ice cream for the first time or cotton candy, and they're just amazed? And the reason I bring that up is I think so many people who have attempted to work remote, and maybe not even work remote, but work on something or fix something on a remote computer, right? They're used to the team viewer and some of the more, shall we say, pedestrian protocols, and those are industrial at best. They were never meant for creatives and video folks and graphics folks. And I kind of liken when you get to use a good protocol, when you get to use something that makes that lag super low and you're in an optimal environment, it's like that baby with the candy. Just, this works. I can't believe it. So at least from my perspective, that's kind of the things I'm seeing.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
So it looks like we're going to dive right into Adobe. So it's a good thing we dangled that Adobe carrot, because we're going to have Adobe questions. So we do have a question from Mark Wagner. How you doing, Mark? Why haven't I come to see you as of late? His question is, what are the best ways to handle variable frame rate media now that everyone is shooting on phones and God knows what else? Transcoding and everything and maintaining audio sync, doing it in bulk. Then how about swapping VFR or less friendly assets for their new transcoded counterparts in a system like Creative Cloud? So Nate, that's a very detailed question, one that has a lot of different angles. Is that something you want to tackle for us?
Yeah, sure. I was actually starting to type it in, but it'll be easier to say because it's long. I'll try to keep it short. One of the things that we have done a lot of work to try to get VFR in a more user-friendly space, because it is something that a lot of timelines, make assumptions based on everything being a certain frame rate, and the way the VFR clips work is different. So it is getting friendlier, but one of the other things too that happens is those sort of codecs are not as edit friendly and very expensive. So, as the frame rates get higher, frame sizes get higher, we are definitely recommending that people, especially if you're doing anything that's longer than a couple of minutes, is to transcode the footage through AME. You can set up batches so that way you get all your media in a more edit friendly codec like ProRes or HD NXR, something like that, where you're not using all your CPU and GPU just to decode the raw stream.
Yeah,
excellent. Isn't there also a feature that was recently introduced in Premiere to automatically set rules for what to do with VFR content?
Yeah, that is something that I know just went in, and that's I would want to do a little more to make sure I get that one right, because that is something new. But it's definitely because one of the things I've had to help with customers is like getting their footage into more usable states, and that is there, but still anything that is a longer format stuff, I still would push towards a transcode workflow.
Yeah, and if I might hop in as well to that kind of with my take. Before I started working in film and TV, I worked in the science and engineering world. And so a lot of my approach to film and television always comes from a matter of efficiency. I'm always trying to improve my efficiency, because the more efficient I can be, the quicker I can be. And frankly, that gets me jobs. And so when we look at things like variable frame rate, although the media, the tools that we use can handle it, you often need to ask yourself, is it necessary to do that? Because whenever you're on a tight deadline with a production, whether you're delivering something for air on cable TV, or whether you're trying to get your independent film out to a film festival, the last thing we want to do is leave something up to chance at that witching hour, at that last minute. And so it's always best, and this comes from when I went to film school, it was just beat into our heads that you always need to spend as much time as you can in pre-production planning for everything. And because if you plan for everything, when something comes up, you have a solution, because inevitably something's going to go wrong, right? I mean, that's always the case. So, my recommendation is always to, as Nate said, throw it through AME and create what your mezzanine file is going to be for that project. And everything gets transcoded into that, because then it eliminates that possibility of having something, throw up in air at the last second. I mean, we have to keep in mind that these computers are designed so that they're very simple to use. But underneath that simplicity is a lot of complexity. And we don't have, typically as users, the insight to be able to troubleshoot that complexity when we're in the midst of a rush to deliver. So I always suggest go through the transcode and just normalize everything from the get-go.
One of my old broadcast sort of truisms was, it's like, pay me now or pay me later. And it's like, pay now and you won't have to pay later.
Yeah.
To that end, with clients I've worked with over the years, the first question is, where's the most stress in a project, right? Is it day one, or is it at 11:30 when you have to get a cut out by 12? It's at 11:30. So why would you incur that extra stress by having all the pressure at the last possible minute? Pay now and do it at the front end, as you mentioned, Nate, as opposed to paying later when you don't have any time to spare. Something else that we get asked quite a bit, and Brian, I would love you to weigh in on this, is that in the creative realm, in the media entertainment realm, or M&E as we call it, it's predominantly Apple-based. It's Mac-based. Folks like rounded edges, go figure. They're accustomed to their hotkeys. They like the dock. They like Apple, not just because you just may like it, but it's familiar, and we make our money off how fast we can edit, how fast we can create. We don't want to be encumbered by technology. But when you start working in the cloud, it limits the availability in terms of the environment you can work in. There is a massive shortage of Apple data centers. A lot of the data centers that have Apple gear are not set up with protocols that we need, that give us that kind of almost real-time access. So, Brian, because you've worked with hundreds of clients over the past couple of weeks, what are you doing to help them make that leap between, I only work in Apple, I only work in Mac OS, and if it's not Mac OS, it's garbage, to now I'm working full-time and I'm accomplishing what I need to inside a Windows OS?
Yeah, I mean, that's another great question of what it's like to edit in the cloud. I mean, there's going to come a time where you have to adapt. And, when throughout my career, because I've jumped around so much, and also because of just the technology advances that have happened over the last, I don't know, maybe 10 years, if not less than that, I got really accustomed to moving between all the different NLEs, just jumping from Avid into Premiere and then into Final Cut X or Final Cut 7 and now into DaVinci. So it's always a changing landscape. And the thing that I always try to tell the creatives when we're getting them onboarded to the BeBop platform is to keep in mind that you aren't hired as an editor specifically because of the technology you're using. You're hired because of your craft. And so with that comes all of the expertise you bring. So when you start working in a new platform or having to adjust in that way, at the end of the day, all that really matters is that you deliver your show and you get paid, right? So we don't want to try to force our workflows into a type of tool. We want to adapt our workflows to optimize that experience, thereby making it more efficient. So when you are coming from the Mac environment, going into Windows can be a little awkward or clunky, because the systems, the operating systems are really kind of designed for different types of user experiences from the beginning. And that comes from the way that they're developed. So, you know, there are a lot of ways that you can easily adapt. You know, for instance, as I've jumped around from Avid to Premiere to Final Cut, I basically started migrating all of my keys, all my quick keys into one hand. And that came out of necessity because, you know, as I'm starting to get a little older, I want to protect my body a little bit. So I've started making adjustments. Like I'm working on a standing desk now. You know, I have arthritis gloves, I don't have arthritis, but I just want to make sure that I don't down the road. But really my keys started coming because I was working on 3 projects that were all on different NLEs. And I wanted to make it so that I could jump quickly between those projects. And then in particular, I switched over to a vertical mouse. And as I was editing and I was using my keyboard commands with both hands on my keyboard, and then I'd go to grab my mouse, because of my muscle memory, I was slapping my mouse across the room. And so I wanted to alleviate some of those keyboard commands. So I started moving them over to my hand. And that's really what my idea, just like going into pre-production and making sure that our media is optimized. We want to optimize ourselves before we try to get into our new workflows. Now, that being said, one of the things I love about BeBop is that we have made adjustments to the platform because this is a platform designed by creatives for creatives. So when you're coming from the Apple environment, we have set up a command that you can move your command key and it changes it into a control key. You know, and there's little things like that we've done to make it easier to transition. Some of it too just comes down to after you join an organization that's going to be working on BeBop and we go through the onboarding process, I spend time with each creative talking about some of those things that they're used to doing and then offer suggestions. You know, a lot of people don't know that if you're used to using the Command Tab key to move between applications in the Mac environment, you can use the Alt Option Tab key to move between the open windows in the Windows environment. So there's a lot of things like that you can do. And some of it just comes down to, you know, to experience and knowledge. And that's one of the offerings that BeBop has. That's why I'm such a fan of this technology is we're all from a creative environment and we have that focus to do that. And then we also improve the platform constantly based on the feedback we get from the creatives.
I think it also may come down to weighing the pros and cons, right? Do the pros of a decentralized, there's your nickel word for the day, do the benefits of a decentralized post-production platform that maybe only Windows outweigh the I need a Mac, and if it's because of Mac, then I have to own that Mac or have a fleet of Macs that I need access to, right? If you're in the cloud, you have an almost infinite number of computers, infinite number of GPUs, infinite number of storage, accessible anywhere, but it's not Mac. But if you want Mac, okay, I have to have that one machine on-prem. So there gets to be what's the benefit, right? And not only does it come down from creatives such as yourself, Brian, you know, what can you tolerate in terms of a good working environment? But I guess this also applies to you because you're a business owner as well. Does that mean that the facility shrinks and people work remote and you're not paying for as much real estate? Does that end up becoming an angle as well in terms of what direction to go? And to be completely honest with you, I don't think there's a perfect approach. I don't think there's an all cloud approach. I don't think there's a complete on-prem approach. It's not a Mac versus PC. It's not cloud versus on-prem. It's you exploit the benefits of both and create your own hybrid model. And that's really how things are going to be. I mean, I'm sure you can attest to this, that we've seen a lot of folks who are moving towards cloud-based platforms, whether it's BeBop or anyone else. It's producers, directors, assistant editors, VFX, motion effects folks. But when it comes to Pro Tools or audio post, when it comes to high-end color grading, well, that's still primarily an on-prem solution. So I think there's going to be a hybrid for the conceivable future. So to remind everyone, please, if you have questions, please put them in chat. Otherwise, we're just going to answer the questions that we got prior. So Brian, what questions have your friends and I back up? Prior to this, obviously, any good presenter is going to have a backup list of questions, right? That they've been asked before that haven't been asked today. So what was number one on that list for you?
Yeah, number one is always, what's it feel like on the platform? And so, I think we kind of covered that a little bit. My experience, just to recap that, my experience has been, especially working with a lot of these editors at different organizations, is that you give it a couple of days and you just completely forget that you're working in the cloud. It feels like you're in your own system. I think that's a testament into it itself. I think the second most often asked question is regarding those media solutions. And as I do a deeper dive talking to a lot of my friends about what they're working on, whether they own a creative agency or they work at a marketing company or they're a small post facility, it actually kind of goes right into what you were just saying. And just as we take that approach in normalizing our media, when you're working remotely or working with all of these collaboration with people all over the place, the desire is always to have a centralized hub of data. And so then we found workarounds to do that, utilizing the Google Suite or using Dropbox or Box or something like that, so that we can move media back and forth, if not using a courier and hard drives. And one of the biggest issues with that comes down to those creatives workstations, because not everybody is upgraded to the latest version of the operating system. Not everyone has the ability. My at-home hardware solution only goes up to High Sierra. I'm locked to that. And because of the type of work I do, I'm kind of locked to that workstation because of what I need within it. And so that can create issues. That can create issues when it comes to working with other creatives that maybe have a more current MacBook Pro or are working on a more current Dell system or something. And so then we have to kind of normalize what our project files are at, which version of Adobe we're running, which, all of these different things. And that's really important. So that's, again, coming back to the BeBop, to the cloud solution, it matters very little what hardware system you're using to connect to the virtual machine, because once you get into the virtual machine, that all gets normalized. So you're all working off of the same version of Premiere or After Effects. You're using a shared storage system, so all of your media is available. But that's really what it comes down to a lot of times, is how do I get everybody to normalize their workflows? And a lot of times, that's really important, especially for smaller marketing agencies. Let's say you only have 3 or 4 creatives that are constantly, revolving door through the business. That's one of the great things about the BeBop solution, is that you stand up the number of workstations that you need. And a lot of times your smaller production company or agency can be limited to how many contracts you can take in based on the number of seats that you can fill. Like, how many actual computers can you afford to bring in the talent? Well, with BeBop, you can scale up and scale down. You don't have to turn down work ever. You can take on as much work as you need. And then your only problem is finding the creative that can do the job, because you can spin up 15 more workstations, in less than a week. And then when that project's done, you can spin them down. And so you can really prioritize your money towards your operating expenses, as opposed to these capital expenditures. And then you have a computer that gets outdated within a year and a half, 2 years, that's just sitting there. So that would be probably the second most, and I don't know, these are all kind of combining together, but second or third most often asked question is, how does it work moving my entire facility into the cloud? And that's really the benefit of it, is that you take that initial jump into it, and there is a hybrid solution that usually starts off with, but eventually you can land almost everything in the cloud.
You mentioned something at the beginning of that answer that I think is very important when folks are looking to do posts in the cloud, is that I think everyone's, maybe not everyone, but many people have gone to other companies or gone to Amazon's website or Azure's website, and they can see, hey, I can get a workstation for $2 an hour. You know, anyone should be able to get started for a real low price. And what we found is that respectfully, that's what a lot of creatives are saying, because they're looking at it as, this is what I need to do my job. And when you're looking at doing collaborative posts in the cloud, there's shared storage, there's security servers, there's servers to get your content up and down, there's redundancy. There are all these other components that make the infrastructure do what the infrastructure does. When an editor goes to work at a facility, on-prem facility, they are traditionally sitting in their bay and they're working with their monitors and computer, but there's tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of equipment that are sitting in the machine room where people are, where processes are being done automatically that a lot of creatives are never seeing. And so when you move to the cloud, you have to realize that not only are you getting this workstation, which has a ton of horsepower, but there's all these little things that are going on that create, that make that centralized, the centralizedness of the post-production in the cloud, and not just islands where you're using the Dropbox or the Google Drive. So with that being said, we've had a couple questions in chat. So I'll tackle one about a point that I just brought up a second ago, and then I think there's something for you to answer, Sim. Joseph asks, why does color grading have to be done in-house? Isn't adequate color management possible for off-prem solutions? Yes, you're completely right. But if we look at what colorists traditionally do, and obviously there's going to be a sliding scale, there's someone who's grading their graduation footage, and then there's someone who's grading a $1 million or a multi-million-dollar feature film. And all of them have different expectations. In a perfect world, when you're grading content, you're grading your camera originals, your OCNs, and then you're usually viewing it on an output on an SDI or HDMI monitor. And while you can certainly upload those fat 8K red files to the cloud, and you can certainly get extra internet bandwidth, and you can certainly invest in an NDI technology, and certainly get that streamed back to your facility, and then get a color grade accurate monitor, a BVM X300 for $30,000. Once you start investing in all of that, you'll see that, yeah, it can be done. But is it in the realm of feasibility for everyone else in the world? And we find that it's rather cost prohibitive at this point to have all that storage in the cloud on fast block storage, which Sim will address in a moment, to have that color grade monitor, and to do all of that when you can simply create proxies, create broadcast ready proxies even, cut, localize the project, and then reconform to your high res and do what you've done in previous workflows. Plus, a lot of color work is done by one person, right? Whoever is the final colorist. And so that collaborative feature is reduced somewhat because they're getting something that already has picture lock. So we find that while you can do it in the cloud, it tends to be a little bit more expensive, and it tends to have a little bit more effort involved, which is why folks are still doing it on-prem. So now there's a technical question for Sim, and I'll read that question for you, and then Sim, jump on in. Jamie Clark says, can you talk about the types of storage and the different tiers of storage that is used on BeBop? So Sim, take it away.
Sure thing. First of all, I think I have a new title for Brian. He's the remote workflow Zen master.
I like that. There's your new business card, Brian.
So yeah, the storages. So we support all different types of storages from every CSP, right? So when you get to Azure, we can jump into providing you with disks that Azure provides, and configuring a storage array for you. Or we can use Azure files. We can jump into AWS, give you EBS block storage, and we can hook up EFS and things like that. Go into Google, we can jump in file store. We can support external storages that are connected to these CSPs, using Zadara and things like that. Faction's another one. So at the end of the day, we support every storage that's pretty much out there. It just depends on what your workflow needs. If you need to work with a lot of small files, then we have certain configurations that will work better for that. So that's where really BeBop kicks in. We benchmark all these storages for the different workflows for the media industry. And honestly, for what would work best on Adobe as well. We have a great partnership with Adobe, and we work day in and day out to make sure the storage that's provided to you from the CSPs work flawlessly for Adobe Premiere. So that's one of the really strengths of BeBop and Adobe's partnership. So I had to plug that in. So, but yeah, we support all different kinds of storages. There's a BeBop component to it on top of these storages, which enhances the storage. It takes it from just plugging in a drive to really where it provides the storage that you need for your workflow. So hopefully that answered your question.
Those are great points, Sim, and I think what that also showcases is that the myth that if you're editing in the cloud, you have to have low resolution proxies. You have to have tiny H.264s. That's not the case. If you've got the bandwidth, you can upload your full res files and work with those. And the storage that we use can give you that throughput if needed.
We can always upgrade storage to very fast IOPS. There's certain companies that are streaming these days with a big N, right? That came to us and wanted fast storage, and within a click of a button, we gave them the fastest storage that was available. So, when you come in with 8K files and you want to work on really fast storage, those kind of configurations are one click to 5 minutes away from starting from use.
And I think.
Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, yeah, I was just going to say to add to that, I think really one of the biggest values of cloud-based editing over remote editing or even working on-prem sometime is that when you get set up in the cloud, you then have access to all of the best technology available today. Whereas if you're on-prem, then you're kind of stuck to whatever can be ordered, shipped, installed, the size of your lease and all of those things. With the cloud, it's fully scalable at any time. And that's really one of the biggest benefits. So if you want to talk about from a user's perspective, we have these SSD storage that are operating in parallel with the BeBop workstation, but then we can make our workflow very transient. So then we can send that down into Glacier. So we can archive into really cheap online storage. And then if we need to pull that back, it just takes a couple of days. And we just plan that and then pull it back. So there's so many options when it comes to the different types of storage available.
That's a very good point. I forgot to mention that all the storage that BeBop provisions comes with BeBop projects. Essentially, they're workspaces that are attached with solutions. Solutions like automatic backup to cloud storage, transcoding, and things like that. So with the storage, you also get a whole host of a suite of services that are attached to it.
We have one last question, and that's from Joseph Sigler. Is hardware support there yet or still coming? Wacom, alternative controllers, and game devices for testing. So this as I'm reading this sounds like it goes a little bit beyond the scope of post-production. But Sim, I don't know if you want to tackle the concept of non-traditional input devices, right? Things not just a standard keyboard and mouse. How are those being used in the cloud today?
So right now there's limited support. Wacom's definitely the one that's been accelerated in this industry in the cloud. So Wacom support is growing. There's a couple of tablets that are already supported, and that list is already growing. As far as alternative devices, if they have a USB connection, most of the times it does work, but it does fall apart when there's some specialized controls. But that's growing. It's a hybrid of it still coming and there as well. So from a Wacom and pressure sensitivity kind of point of view, even all Wacom tablets work. You just don't have the pressure sensitivity, right? So there's little nuances to what works and what doesn't work with all these devices, and really demand is what will grow the adoption. So if more artists come on there and more flavors of Wacom tablets are required, the more grading tools that are required, that's where the industry is going to start pushing to make it to kind of adapt these kind of new tools and hardware.
And to that end, one of the things that I've seen there be a little bit of a deficit just across the board, and this kind of goes back to your question earlier about grading, is that a lot of the DaVinci panels, right? A lot of the tangent panels, the wave products, those have exploded over the past 7 or 8 years because of Blackmagic and Resolve and the price point. And I've found that those aren't supported nearly as much as they could be. However, the other side of that is, well, if color is usually only being done by one person on larger budget things, is there a massive market for folks who want to A, use the panels, and B, want to do it in the cloud? So that becomes kind of a niche area. That being said, I would love to see the Blackmagic panels and maybe even some of the other more common panels, even Euphonics, work in the cloud. We would love to see that. Okay, we got one more question. I got one more question here. It says Stadia is working on having 5.1 and 7.1 audio through the Chrome browser. Is this something you're working on as well? That's a good question. I think there's a couple different paradigms we need to look into, and they all fall under the broad category of DaaS, or desktop as a service. If you start looking at some solutions, they're using a web browser as the viewing mechanism on what's going on those gaming platforms, and they're also